Reason to help Coach Jim Stanley calm nerves, control poise, realize what is at hand. Across the way, the locker room of the Philadelphia Stars, just last Saturday, part of a considerable miracle to get to Denver, Colorado for the championship game. Their 15 wins, they came from behind a number of times. They know well the rewards of enduring, persevering, believing in themselves. Because in the game that bought them the ticket to the championship game was one of the more remarkable football comebacks ever, trailing 38-17 to Chicago. With 12 minutes to play, they fought back, tied the game on Tom Donovan's 10-yard touchdown with just 50 seconds to play. And then, in overtime, Philadelphia won the toss, drove 73 yards, beating Chicago 44-38 in overtime as Calvin Bryant scored over the top. The Michigan Panthers rolling into the playoffs, defeated Pacific Division champion Oakland 37-21. John Williams scoring 5 yards out to tie the game at 7 early, and then a record USFL crowd of 60,237 roared as Ken Lacey streaked into the end zone to complete the purchase of the championship game ticket for the Michigan Panthers. And tonight, ABC Sports presents the first championship game of the United States Football League. The Michigan Panthers and the Philadelphia Stars.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Whoa, Nelly, everyone, how are you? It's your pal Tim Hanlon, that is. It's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thanks for finding us. And it's crackling excitement is in the air. It's the USFL, or we think is coming back. It's the second incarnation of it, and that's our conversation today as we get into speculation. This is going to be an episode really of speculation as we try to sort of piece together what the hell is going on with this, we think, reconstituted, brand new version of the old USFL, the United States Football League. Now, before we get into the granulars, let's talk about that clip there at the top. That gives you a little bit of excitement, I guess, that was the USFL back in the early 1980s. That was the lead-in with the late and absolutely great Keith Jackson at ABC Sports calling the beginnings, the intro of that game on Sunday, July 17th, 1983, live from then known as Mile High Stadium in Denver. The first ever championship game between the Michigan Panthers and the Philadelphia Stars, a game ultimately won by the Panthers 24-22 in a very compelling football match. And concluding the first season of the USFL with games on ABC and ESPN. And it was lots of excitement. I think it not only matched expectations that first season, but it exceeded them on a number of different levels. I think it was more viewed on television. The ratings were a little bit higher than they imagined. And I think the attendance was around 26,000, which is right about where they were thinking, but some gigantic crowds that dotted the landscape along the way. And we all know sort of the history of the league. There are plenty of episodes that we have done with participants in, as well as documentarians of and authors of the USFL. Plenty of great episodes. Jeff Pearlman being one, of course, with the great book "Football for a Buck," among many others conversations. But we're going to get into what we think this new USFL might be, good, bad, and maybe ugly. with our guest this week, Scott Adamson. He a return guest from about a year ago. If you remember, in our episode number 184, we talked about the city of Birmingham, Alabama, and its multiple exposures, travails, and ultimately disappointments with pro football. And his great book, The Home Team, My Bromance with Off-Brand Football, is a must-read for any fan of not only the USFL, but any of the leagues that have sort of come and gone since the 1970s. And here we are yet again with another version of this, the USFL 2.0. I guess a reconstituted spring league is kind of the sort of foundation for this. And it is going to be domiciled, we think, not officially yet, but pretty darn close to it, in Birmingham. An 8-team USFL league with the various brand names, or at least some of the brand names, trademarks and all, from the original USFL. And they're going to play next year, supposedly, with the heavy hand of Fox Sports as an investor. And as we're recording this, a hefty bunch of Fox Sports executives going to be handling the football operations. And Brian Woods, the founder and CEO of the Spring League, is still very much in the mix and is going to be ahead of the football product and all of it. But Fox Sports, with all likelihood, will be broadcasting, I don't know if all the games, and maybe try to sort of offload some of the games to other possible participants. But it's going to be an experience. Let's put it that way. April through, we think, July of next year is the season. These teams yet to be named and even domiciled. I think the thought is to have the teams play in a single environment down in Birmingham, the brand new stadium down there, and Legion Field even as well. And then I think the goal ultimately is to get those teams into their various cities whenever they're named and figured out. But there's a long, long road until that happens. And Lord knows we've been disappointed before, and nobody probably has been more viscerally disappointed than our guest this week in Birmingham. And Scott Adamson has been through just about all of them, all the way from the Birmingham Americans and Vulcans, two teams in the World Football League. The Birmingham Stallions, of course, were the franchise in the USFL. They lasted all 3 seasons in the USFL and did pretty darn good for themselves. But also, there's been a lot of football of the pro variety in Birmingham since then. The Birmingham Fire of the World League of American Football, the Birmingham Barracudas in 1995 of the Canadian Football League when the CFL branched out into the United States for a couple of years. The Thunderbolts, the Birmingham Thunderbolts of the original and 1-year XFL in 2001. And even the short-lived Alliance of American Football from just recently in 2019, the Birmingham Iron. All of those teams have come and gone. And yet here again is Birmingham and pro football. Yet again, it's like Lucy in the Peanuts cartoon with that football. And here comes Charlie Brown, and whoop, just at the last second, Lucy will pull it away again. And we wonder aloud, and in conversation with our guest this week, Scott Adamson, what will become, what will be ahead for this newly announced and remaining to be seen USFL version 2.0. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what we think we know, some speculation about what possibly could happen, certainly some lamenting ahead of time as to what could badly go wrong given all the previous experiences. And it's just an interesting, hopefully, conversation that maybe gets you geared up for the full and more pronounced announcements to come about this United States Football League coming up next year in 2022. Do we root for it? Are we cynical about it? Maybe it's probably a little bit of somewhere in between, but we want to get into the conversation. The USFL is coming back in some way, shape, or form, and we can't wait to present this chat with you with Scott Adamson in a few moments' time. Now, to get you set for that chat. How about 4 great sponsors that all have wonderful USFL original version stuff that make great holiday gifts as you might get ready for that football fan in your life who might want to remember the old school version of the USFL and all those great logos and teams and memorabilia and all that stuff. And so let's just roll through these 4 great sponsors, and we've got promo codes for all of them. Get your USFL on, the original version on, from our great sponsors. Let's start with oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS. 10% off all of your purchases there. Great t-shirts. Lots of different versions of such from just about all the teams that ever played in the USFL. Fantastic stuff. Oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS. 417 helmets, collectible helmets, and more. 417helmets.com. 417helmets.com. Promo code GOODSEATS there for 10% off all of your purchases. And yes, like the name implies, collectible mini helmets. All of the teams of the old USFL are represented, and they're finely crafted. They're great and wonderful pieces of memorabilia for you to have, to hold, and to cherish. So check them out. Streakersports.com, the purveyors of sports culture. Promo code there for you is GOODSEATS, and that's 15% off all of your purchases there. Streaker Sports has wonderful, well-crafted shirts for you there. All the USFL teams beautifully laid out there for you, and the great shirts there for you to choose, different designs to choose among at streakersports.com. Promo code GOODSEATS. And last but not least, our friends at Royal Retros. RoyalRetros.com. The king of throwbacks. Promo code there is SEATS. Just plain old SEATS. 10% off all of your purchases there. Not only great t-shirts from the USFL, but wonderful handcrafted, custom-made, get your name and number on them on the back if you want, USFL jerseys, home and away. They are lovingly crafted from the old videos and the game footage and stuff. And you really want to impress your USFL friends, both old and new. Why not you get yourself an authentic Royal Retros throwback jersey from the old USFL. Again, that's 503sports.com, promo code SEATS. Sorry, not 503 Sports. That's their old name. It's royalretros.com. Please, 503 is the sub-brand now. Promo code SEATS at royalretros.com. Streakersports.com, promo code GOODSEATS. 417helmets.com, promo code GOODSEATS. And oldschoolshirts.com, promo code GOODSEATS. Happy shopping. Get your holiday shopping in now, and you'll be glad you did. And please enjoy the savings on us and our fine sponsors. All right, let's get into USFL football, both old and hopefully, or maybe not so hopefully, new. We'll sit back and watch and sort of see what transpires. But here's the conjecture. Let's have this conversation now. Here it is. Scott Adamson joins us again, and we welcome him back to our microphones as we talk about the United States Football League version 2.0. Here's our conversation we had just a couple of days back. Please enjoy. It's been a year since we've last chatted, but no more perfect time, I think, and a good excuse than to talk about this, this USFL 2.0. And when sort of going through my records and stuff, I figured, well, okay, who's our man in Birmingham? And I know that you've moved back there and have spent a ton of time in your career writing about sports and other things there. So I figured maybe we should go perhaps to where the center of gravity is on this situation. But before we sort of get there, why don't you remind our audience who either forgot or never listened to our episode back in October of 2020, your background, and I think perhaps why I think you're probably on the catbird seat, I guess, at least geographically for, some speculation that we'll talk about.
Yeah, I started my newspaper career in Alabama. Of course, I'm a Birmingham native, and I started back in 1987. Before that, though, of course, I was a fan. So with the World Football League in 1974 and then working through all the leagues after that, I either followed them as a fan or actually got to write about a few of them, when it sort of crossed over into my newspaper days. But I'd spent 15 years in Greenville, South Carolina. I moved there in, I guess it was 2006, and worked for 15 years. But then finally got tired of newspapers, and my wife and I got into a situation where we could move back home. So we've been back in Birmingham now for 5 months now. And I guess the timing is pretty good. You know, I come back home, and all of a sudden, here's news of another spring football league. So I guess they knew I was coming or something.
Well, and it's also especially perfect because your book that came out last year, which I highly encourage our listeners to get if they haven't already gotten it, called The Home Team, My Bromance with Off-Brand Football, right, is largely centered around your memories, both professionally and personally, around Birmingham's, shall we say, unique history with football leagues and teams in various flavors of professionalism over the years.
I guess probably the most ink went to the World Football League, and that was probably because, you know, that was my first love, you know, 1974, 1975, and they had two different teams. They had the Birmingham Americans in 74, and then came back in 75 with the new franchise, the Birmingham Vulcans. But I also devoted a whole lot of space to the USFL because really, in retrospect, of all the leagues that Birmingham was a part of, that was clearly, to me, the best league in terms of the most talent. And it's just one of those things that even though it lasted 3 years, it really, really left a huge impact on me and a lot of people. I think there are so many of us who look back fondly on the USFL. Us older guys who actually lived through it, you know, the people who watched it on television and went to the games. And, you know, now you have this new thing coming up, which is calling itself the USFL. And I know they have the trademarks and they have the logo, but like I wrote the other day, I wish it was something else. You know, the National Spring Football League, whatever their umbrella company is that owns it, if they called it that, I would be a lot more, I guess, open to it than trying to, you know, bring back something from 40 years ago that they're just not going to be able to duplicate.
Well, let's kind of circle around that 40 years ago ish thing, because what do you remember of the Birmingham Stallions in the USFL version 1.0? They were, from my recollection, not only one of the good handful of teams that lasted all three of its seasons, and arguably would have probably survived, quote unquote, the shift to a fall calendar against the NFL, because of course there was no NFL franchise in Birmingham and never really kind of was. But I remember the Stallions and some of those ABC television games, televised games, as being perennially strong and, if I have this correct, enormously well supported, no?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were, you know, as far as the league itself, they did a pretty good job. I think their first season was probably their weakest attendance-wise. I think that's when they finished like a 500 record or something. And I believe when I was looking it up, the average was only like 22,000 for 83. But then in 84, they were a pretty darn good football team in 84, average attendance was over 36,000. And then the last season in 1985, it was, I think it was back down to like 32,000. It was starting to drop a little, I think, because people could kind of see that the end was near when they, you know, when they were going to make the fall shift. But yeah, they were, their second and third seasons, they were very good teams. And I believe it was year number 3 when they played the Baltimore Stars in the Eastern Conference Championship game. I believe that's right. And of course they lost because they had a rough time playing the Stars. I think maybe they only beat them once in their entire history. But yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it had to kind of grow on me. The first season in 83, I was really into basketball and I'd kind of gotten away from football and I wasn't really on board with the concept of spring football that much. So the team and the league kind of had to grow on me. But by 84, I was fully invested in it and just thought, you know, man, this isn't the NFL, but it's pretty darn close. And then in 1985, I thought this yeah, this is Major League Football. It's not at the NFL level, but it's close enough to where I think, anyone that wants to watch good football can watch the USFL and they're going to see good football.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up, right, is because from what we've learned thus far, last week, today, as we're recording, the USFL is officially re-announced, shall we say. And we'll get into some of the particulars in a while. But one of the components of it is, at least for the first season, and maybe perhaps even two, is this notion, this idea, not only of having a reimagined or at least a reincarnated Birmingham Stallions franchise as part of this new USFL, but also, at least in the interim, having the games centered in one place, kind of sort of like I guess what in the COVID era would have sort of been known as a bubble, but one location for all these games before even contemplating actually playing in these other cities. And the city that's been decided, we think, not officially, but pretty darn close, I think, is Birmingham.
Right. I mean, it looks like both the city of Birmingham and Jefferson County have already, said, okay, we'll give you the money that you're asking to put this on. And, what they were saying earlier was that Protective Stadium, which is the new stadium in Birmingham, it seats 47,000. That'll be the main stadium, but I think they mentioned that there was a possibility that some of the overflow games could be played at Legion Field. But, when they made the announcement today that games would be on Saturday and Sunday, I assume it'll be kind of a doubleheader situation on both days. So I don't really know how they plan to, you might have a game at 1 p.m. and a game at, 5 p.m. at Protective, and then you could do that again on Sunday. So I don't really know what they plan to do, but it is kind of interesting to think of the city of Birmingham hosting an entire league. I mean, that's different. I mean, of all the things that have happened when it comes to Birmingham and alternative football, that's certainly going to be a first.
All right, well, let's two things there. So number one, maybe for our audience who hasn't been paying attention to the stadium situation in Birmingham, I think everybody knows and reveres and certainly harkens back and remembers in various flavors Legion Field, right? Not only as a college football temple, shall we say, and an occasional major separate event like, say, a World Cup or actually, no, it was an Olympic soccer game or tournament, I think, back in the 90s when Atlanta was hosting. But you're mentioning this, the new Protective Stadium / field. What is it? Where is it in relation to in relation to Legion Field, and for what purpose? I'm assuming the UAB Blazers in college, yeah?
Right. It was built with the idea that UAB would be the main tenant, which is the case. This is the first season that UAB has played there. And it's a stadium. It's located in what's kind of been reinvented in the part of Birmingham. It's called the Uptown Entertainment District. And it's right near the Civic Center Coliseum where the old Birmingham Bulls and the WHA used to play. And they've remodeled that, and they built this stadium, and they built an entertainment area to sort of, reinvent the north side of Birmingham a little bit. Birmingham's been going through a bit of a renaissance in the last few years, and this is part of that. It's just trying, South Side was, I guess, the go-to place in Birmingham for several years, and it still is to a degree, but I think they're trying to sort of spread it out and make the north side of Birmingham also a kind of a cool place. And they've done a great job. I mean, it's beautiful down there now, and the stadium's beautiful. It's designed, it's got a lot of concourse space, so it's really, it doesn't work too well in the era of COVID, but the idea is that, people can mingle and move about the stadium, and it's, I've been there for every game that UAB's played, and it really is. It's a nice experience, and you can walk right out and go to a restaurant or bar or whatever you want to do. So that's kind of the crown jewel of that particular area. And I know before anything came up involving USFL, they talked about not only UAB, but, getting international soccer matches there, possibly lacrosse, with the Premier Lacrosse League doing their thing where they go to different cities. And, they just want to use it, or they built it so they could bring in a lot of event type things. And Birmingham sort of has a reputation as an event town. So I think they're thinking if they can get an NFL exhibition, or, maybe make the Birmingham Bowl more attractive with whatever teams they bring in, or, get a big soccer match, that they can bring people downtown and just make it part of an experience. So that's what Protective Stadium is. It's kind of taking the place more or less of Legion Field, which, they're not tearing down Legion Field. It's still in use, but it's a stadium that's almost 100 years old now. And it's just not really, it's got obviously a lot of tradition and wonderful memories, but it's not in disrepair, but it's just not really a shining jewel anymore like it once was. And so they're trying to.
Yeah, it's also cavernous, right? I mean, and if you're if you do anything in a fledgling or competitive or challenger league of any sort, right? A more, shall we say, right-sized stadium is probably helpful to that mixture.
Sure, and Legion Field at one point I think seated like 82,000, but then they had to remove the upper deck due to structural issues. But it still seats 72,000, and that's a whole lot of empty seats. When it was a lot of empty seats when UAB played there, and now with 47,000 seats, you're still going to have. I mean, based on what UAB's drawn this year, not even close to a sellout. But yeah, that's a little bit closer to having. You're not going to have an NFL team. You're not going to have to worry about bringing an NFL franchise to Birmingham. But yeah, something that seats 47,000 is a little closer to standalone events and leagues that aren't known as the NFL.
Yeah, look, and you also mentioned the Birmingham Bowl, now known as the Ticket Smarter Birmingham Bowl. I'm always fascinated by getting the right sponsor names involved. It's another sort of pet peeve / fascination of mine for other episodes to come. Even though it's not professional, it's certainly indicative of things that have come and gone. Lots of different attempts at all that stuff. But look, you get if one gets the right SEC, I don't know, 10th team and the 8th best team in the American or Conference USA, you could have a pretty hefty attendance this year for the first version of that bowl game in the new Protective Stadium this year.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, one thing, it opened with UAB playing Liberty, and it was supposed to be, if you looked at the weather forecast a couple of days earlier, it was supposed to be a beautiful night, cool, just lovely weather. Well, there was a huge storm. There was a lot of rain. It was nasty. So they didn't really have the crowd that they hoped for. Plus UAB got their clocks cleaned. So that kind of, I think, killed the buzz. I think UAB was thinking, okay, if we can beat Liberty, which is a ranked team, or at least a very good mid-major team, that might, bring a lot of people into Protective week in and week out. And UAB's drawing fine for a group of 5 team, but again, they haven't come even close to filling up that stadium. But sure, you get a bowl game, maybe get some nice weather and a couple of attractive teams. That might be the event where you get, if you get 40,000 people in a 47,000 seat stadium, that's going to look pretty good.
Well, you betcha. And that's sort of where I'm sort of circling around, is that if you're going to have a facility, right, that's going to be the majority of the games for this sort of 8 team, or is it 12 teams? I've even forgot.
8 teams.
8 teams, right? It's certainly, to your point, doubleheaders and it's a lot of modern conveniences. I'm sure the sight lines will be better for television and all that kind of stuff. It just seems to me more logical, perhaps short of having a soccer-specific stadium, which is even smaller still, to put on television and make looks halfway decent a supposedly new professional USFL. Let me ask you this. Do you envision that facility doing well, I guess, for serving up pro fare? Obviously a college game is a different kind of experience, But I got to think that there's some new niceties there that would be a draw in and of itself, let alone the football, right? You might get that more casual fan who might be attracted to a new facility, gleaming and sparkling and fresh.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's, one of the cool things. The first time I went to it, I thought, well, obviously I'm going for a game, but it is kind of an experience just because of where it's situated. I mean, it's a neat looking stadium to be in. When you walk around, the concourse, you can look out and see the entertainment district. And again, literally it's right across the street. I mean, you walk out of the stadium and you walk into, you walk over to some steps and you've got restaurants and bars and everything. So yeah, it is something that I think, they can say, look, such and such team is playing here and that's great. Go to the game, but also enjoy all the amenities surrounding the game. And I think if they market it right and you get, some decent events in here, it could really be hopping. I mean, because it's just, it's a fun place. I mean, it's very, it's just one of those things that after you've walked around it, you think, man, Birmingham did a really, really, really this. So I think they're thinking they need a lot of events. I'm sure there'll be, some big concerts that they'll have there, but, certainly they would want some NFL exhibitions. And NFL exhibition games in Birmingham have always done very well. So I think that would be something that they certainly could sell out.
All right, so okay, given the somewhat shaky sort of start and foundation of this USFL 2.0, and we'll talk about some of the origins in a minute, who do you think, based on your local knowledge, approached whom, right? Is this the league, the Spring League, which is the genesis of this? We'll talk about the Spring League in a minute. Kind of finding Birmingham, or Birmingham possibly kind of pitching themselves, perhaps maybe because of the new stadium, the entertainment district, wanting a showcase event of some sort, some national attention, perhaps, football, reaching out and trying to woo this USFL thing? Or is it maybe a combination of both, or a group grope?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because it seems like it just kind of came out of nowhere. I just remember seeing that Birmingham was being considered as the hub for the first year of the USFL. And then when I've heard city leaders talk about it, they've never really said, they've just said, oh, this is a great opportunity. This is going to showcase our city and blah, all the stuff, all the Chamber of Commerce stuff that you're expected to say. But I honestly have no idea. I don't know if city leaders got wind of this league and heard that they were thinking about doing a bubble season and pitched it. I mean, that would make perfect sense considering all this is brand new, and that would be something that a city leader, I think, would think, oh, okay, well, this would be a great way to sort of, keep the momentum going with this new stadium and new entertainment district. But I don't really know how that happened. It just kind of first of all, the announcement that there was going to be a quote unquote new USFL caught me off guard. And then when I saw that Birmingham was being considered to be the host town for the first season, I thought, wow, everything's happening very fast. And I'm not really entirely sure what's even going on here.
Well, but as Neil DeMouse, the writer and chief brain trust behind Field of Schemes, which is just an absolutely essential blog, continues to cover, all kinds of, shall we call them, stadium shakedowns of municipalities, usually by the NFL or pro leagues and stuff. It seems that there was a pretty, quick process within the management of hallways in government of Birmingham to kind of bend over backwards and make it a relatively attractive proposition. I'm sure there's tax money and all that kind of stuff. And but yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, the sheer speed, I think, not only of announcing this league, right, which was kind of thrown out there in sort of the waning days of the Spring League last season, and then sort of some bits and pieces of intrigue along the way, it does seem pretty quick. And I wonder how the taxpayers might feel about all of this. It seems like probably some concessions were made and maybe not yet sort of figured out by government to get them in.
Well, and that's what worries me. I mean, when I saw that the money that both the county and city was putting up, the way they were talking about it, it's like they were putting up money for some well-established league that was a sure bet. And, I just remember, cities get shaken down all the time, but I remember during the original Stallions, the original USFL, the city of Birmingham, I think, decided to loan the Stallions $1 million or something. And this was, I can't remember if it was 84 or 85. It was when the Stallions were kind of in financial straits and you were starting to worry about the long-term viability of the USFL. And I remember when Birmingham talked about, giving that money, I'm thinking, yeah, they are giving the money. It's a donation because that's money that's just going to be gone. And I just wonder, again, I know nothing about business. I mean, seriously, I'm an absolute moron when it comes to that sort of stuff. But anytime you have a league that comes along and the city just offers to throw all this money at it and you don't even really know what the league is yet, I don't know. It just worries me. I mean, obviously, I always hope for the best anytime a new league comes along, and especially if Birmingham's involved in it. But holy smoke! I mean, let's face it. I mean, the track record. It's not that spring football has a poor track record. It's got no track record. I mean, it just doesn't last.
Yeah, and I'm referring, obviously, it looks, I think Neil has quoted something on the order of like $3 million to cover quote-unquote expenses for the league's first year, and there's another $700,000 that's sort of been floated around, so it's actually a little bit higher than that $3 million originally, and that's a combination of bucks coming from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the city itself, Jefferson County, it's interesting, right? I mean, it's no different, or it seems no different than, say, a city a team going to a city saying we either need a new facility or we need to build a facility in order to grant a franchise and all that kind of stuff. Here now you have a supposedly 8-team league kind of doing the shaking down. And to your point, it's not so fully fleshed out yet. Like as we talk about today, this announcement today that there's some new executives from Fox Sports that are sort of into this, and Fox Sports essentially is going to essentially be the controlling entity in this new league. There's not a whole lot of detail around it. We still don't even know the names of the actual 8 teams. We don't know anything about it except the fact that it's supposedly going to start in April, which is a new development versus, say, February, like the old or second version of the XFL and the AAF, which was started in, in February, just after the Super Bowl. So there's going to be a bit of a gap. But I don't know. It does seem a little premature to put that kind of money against something that's not fully determined yet.
Well, and here's the thing and hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll get answers on this. I realize that they bought, the logos and the naming rights and all this kind of stuff, but I almost get the impression that this is going to be like a startup fair, that they're going to have 8 unbranded teams. Well, we'll have the Stallions, but I'm not so sure they're going to be the Birmingham Stallions. And we'll have the Invaders and the Stars, but I'm not sure there's going to be cities attached to their names. It's almost like, okay, we're going to have these teams here and we're going to kind of shop them because they obviously don't have any, they're talking about moving to other cities, but they haven't named any of those cities. They haven't mentioned if it's going to be single entity or if they're looking for owners. And going back to what you were mentioning about the money, if these are unbranded teams, who's going to come from outside the city to watch them? You know what I mean? I mean, I guess, theoretically, if you had the Chicago Blitz, if you named it, you got a Blitz team and you say that they're going to represent Chicago, sure, a couple of people are going to drive down from Chicago to the games, but I just don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I'm just under the impression it is going to be, at least for this first year, like the spring league where you just had nicknames and you've got players attached to them. Maybe as a concession to Birmingham, the Stallions would actually be the Birmingham Stallions. But I just don't know. I mean, it's just not clear what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's clearly unclear for sure. I mean, 8 teams, 2 divisions, right? But it's going to be clearly artificial, right? The And if there are cities attached to them, right, there is the expectation over a year or two. I think what seems to be gelling here is that there's going to be a first season in one place, ostensibly Birmingham, not official yet, but pretty darn close. A second year that's probably also going to be singularly located. And maybe that becomes an interesting dynamic, whether Birmingham would do it again or there's another city involved. And then I think kind of by year 3, the idea is to have at least some of these games, if not all of them, somewhat domiciled in these other places. But I guess what that requires, right, is if that's going to be the case and they're going to sort of come out and say that, you'd actually have to think 3 years out as to where those 8 cities would be, right? Which is not easy because that's 8 times the stadium availabilities thing and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a lot of foresight for something that we don't even know what's going to look like next year.
Well, and I'm thinking too, since the XFL started making some noise about who's going to be part of their executive team, if the USFL does decide to do that, where they have 8 unbranded teams, if I'm the XFL, I just go ahead and, okay, we're going to put teams in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Diego, St. Louis. I would go ahead and lock down some of, some cities that would be, that are in your major markets. And then all of a sudden you put the USFL on its heels. It's like, oh crap, we should have gone ahead and, signed stadium leases and worked with the cities instead of just giving them names. I mean, this sort of reminds me of what happened, the last version of the XFL. Vince McMahon had announced it, and you thought, okay, there's going to be spring football in 2020. Well, then the Alliance of American Football just showed up. Remember, they just kind of came out of nowhere, too, and sort of leapfrogged the XFL. And, of course, they only make it through 8 weeks or whatever. And this is a little bit different, but you do have another league that's going to go ahead and start against another league that plans to start a year out. So it's just – that's what kind of intrigues me is sort of the behind the scenes battle between 2 leagues that don't even really officially exist yet, other than having a name and having a few people in executive positions.
Well, the irony is not lost on me, right? Because as we talked about in our previous episode when your book came out last year, the history of football professionally in Birmingham it's almost like the old Peanuts cartoon with Lucy holding the football and Charlie Brown getting up to run and just about ready to kick it, and Lucy pulls it away. I think a lot is, I think it's not unimportant to think through what's happened in Birmingham over the years since the USFL and frankly even the WFL back in the 70s, right? There's been, by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4 full-fledged, maybe some minor ones that I'm missing, football leagues and teams that have called Birmingham home since the USFL. You had the Birmingham Fire of the World League. You had the Birmingham Barracudas for 1995 and the Canadian Football League for their couple-of-year expansion into the United States. The original XFL in 2001 with the Thunderbolts that only lasted a year. And less than a year, the alliance with the Birmingham Iron in 2019 in Legion Field. So I guess the question is, and you're the Birmingham native, what makes anybody in Birmingham with any sort of semblance of history think that this is going to be any different? Well,
honestly, I think less people think it'll be any different because it was funny when I was trying to do a little research for the show. I was looking at attendance figures for these teams, and starting with what you mentioned, you forget about the WFL, you forget about the USFL. The Birmingham Fire, their first season in 91, drew 25,000 fans a game. But the second year, 92, they only drew 14,000. And then the Barracudas averaged 17,000, the Bolts averaged 17,000, and then the Iron averaged 14,000. So, you look at those numbers and you look at Birmingham's reputation as football capital of the South and loving football and stuff. Those aren't great numbers, for the past few years. I mean, Birmingham especially, I remember the Barracudas, the opening game against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I think they had 40-something thousand people at Legion Field. But there again, Birmingham is an event town. A lot of times they will show up for something, but then they don't really show up again because, by the end of the Barracuda season, literally there were crowds measured by like 2,000, 3,000. I mean, once college football and NFL started up, people just completely abandoned them. But I think, there's a hardcore of people that want it to happen, and I think there are a lot of younger people, some young football fans that don't really have the point of reference maybe that I do, that are hopeful, and I'm hopeful for them. But it's just, you just got to look at history. The only positive I can think is, okay, we went forever wondering if a 16 seed was ever going to be the 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Well, it finally happened. So, now when these spring leagues pop up, you think, well, which spring league is going to be that 16 seed? Which is going to be the one that finally figures out something that none of the other leagues have figured out? And I want it to happen. I'm kind of like Fox Mulder there. I want to believe, but I've just seen it so many times. It's just exhausting. Now whereas used to, I get really excited when I heard about a new league or a new team coming to Birmingham. Now it's like, oh man, what's going to happen with this one?
Nice X-Files callback there. Very good. Well, it's called the Magic City for a reason, and maybe there is some magic still left in pro football. To be really cynical for a minute, I tweeted at this today as we're recording this. What my initial reaction was, perhaps attendance really doesn't matter, right? With Fox Sports's investment and partial or majority or some kind of ownership and certainly operational control, right? Today was announced. Eric Shanks, who's the head of Fox Sports, essentially is the chairman of the board. You've got Ed Hartman from Fox Sports, who's going to be the head of business operations. The Fox NFL and college rules analyst Mike Pereira is going to be ostensibly the officiating head. You've got some Moose Johnston football operations. So obviously Fox is bringing in some people, but maybe it doesn't matter. It's almost like ESPN events propping up, 20 of the seemingly 10,000 college football bowl games every year. I think it's lost on people that the Military Bowl and the Armed Forces Bowl, and I think maybe even the Birmingham Bowl, for that matter, are all produced by ESPN events, right? Which is essentially to prop up, if you will, no disrespect, a game for television, right? It's because it's a pure moneymaker during the holidays.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Attendance is irrelevant. And I think you may very well be right, when you talk about, especially since it's sort of the offshoot of the spring league. Of course, the spring league didn't even pay players. Players had to pay to participate in the spring league, but it was just inexpensive spring entertainment for them. So I don't think it really mattered to them that there was anyone in the stands, and especially when you had no overhead with players. You weren't paying them. And see, that's another thing. That's probably more than anything else. I want to know, what is their compensation plan? Because then you're going to find out what kind of players you're going to get. Are they going to pay like AAF and XFL money, where it's a real developmental league where you got these guys who, they're XFL veterans who have made starts in the NFL and done pretty well? Are they going to be able to afford that kind of talent? Or are they even interested in that? Are they just going to roll the dice and think, look, if we show football in the spring and we put teams in uniforms that they remember from 1983 or 1985, they're going to watch. We talked about it earlier. There's just so many questions that I really would like answered, before you can even comment on what the long-term viability or the potential viability of something like this even is.
Yeah, well, look, Brian Woods is the founder and CEO of the Spring League that's been around for a handful of years and is essentially been more of, to your point, like a kind of a showcase for players, gives them a couple of more games, a couple of more reps in there. And has been domiciled in a single location. The teams are, if you will, manufactured or without locational parts to their nicknames and all that kind of stuff. So they are kind of generic, if you will, in that regard. But he's involved, right? And it's kind of hard to think that. And again, my initial reaction is that the somewhat ham-handed approach to licensing and or trademarking some of these old USFL team names and the USFL name itself feels kind of, nakedly brazen to slap on some nostalgia or artificial nostalgia atop a league that probably is going to be maybe just another iteration of the Spring League, which is, a fairly generic pool of players and artificial teams.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If the USFL signs whoever wins the Heisman Trophy this year, or if they start outbidding NFL for players, then I'll think, okay, maybe there is some lineage to the original USFL. But we know that's not going to happen. I mean, none of those things, I wrote about it, a few days ago. Whatever the original USFL was, this has nothing to do with that other than the names. And yeah, that's just me. And that's just me being an old grumpy guy, because I'd also mentioned there, in other situations like the New York Cosmos bouncing around to different leagues, that doesn't bother me. But there's just something about the USFL that just that one little pocket in history that was so special. I just kind of want to leave alone. I just want to look back at, and there were a lot of, obviously, that I make it up to be a much more successful venture, obviously, than it was. But it's still, for 3 years, it was really, really cool. And it's just, I don't know, to pretend that you're bringing it back, I think is really disingenuous.
No, I would tend to agree, but I try to keep an open mind too. And maybe it would be a little different if there is an honest and true attempt to kind of reel back some of that history and kind of thread that story and all of that back into it, right? I mean, we've seen the rehabilitation of old North American soccer league teams, aside from the Cosmos, in today's Major League Soccer. You got 4, I think, franchises, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's another 1 or 2 that come along the way that took the names from their predecessors and, in their own individual ways, interestingly, some of them better than others, have reeled back that history and woven it in and sanded over, I guess, the gap years between the 70s and 80s and the current league, right? So anything, I guess, is possible. But, I mean, we have a long way to go, right? Including, by the way, naming the actual cities and having them domiciled there before we even get to that, right?
Yeah, and again, I hate to sound negative because obviously I want, I'd love for it to succeed. In a perfect world, if I could choose between Birmingham having a team in this, in the USFL and the new XFL, I would prefer the XFL just based on the last iteration, which had to be shut down due to COVID. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I love the rule innovations. I thought it was entertaining football. Now, Birmingham didn't have a team, so it's not like I was, married to watching it every weekend. And I've gotten to where I'm kind of I've gotten to be a pretty big rugby fan, and rugby plays in the spring now, so I'm going to watch Major League Rugby more than just about anything else during the spring. But, I thought the last iteration of the XFL was pretty good football, and I enjoyed that. But there again, I think TV ratings were starting to wane a little bit, and other than places like, I know St. Louis drew real well, and a couple other cities, but it seems like anytime they form these leagues lately, they're making a 3-year commitment. I know McMahon did that with the XFL. I think, what you mentioned earlier, I think Fox is trying to do that where they ride out 3 years and see what happens. But honestly, to me, if you really wanted to make a league like this work, and nobody's going to do this because they're not going to want to spend the money, but you need to make like a 10-year commitment. You need to have a big sample size where you find out, after 5 or 6 years what you can expect, every season for average attendance, advertising dollars, merchandise sales. And I just don't think you can really do that after 3 years. I mean, these people, the money is there, but for some reason it's like they think after 3 seasons we're going to turn a profit, and that's just not going to happen. It's just not.
Well, again, if it's cheap programming for television, the other parts of it don't seem to necessarily matter as much, right? So, look, if you keep it domiciled in one location, you make it a festival kind of thing, not unlike the Premier League, Lacrosse League. I mean, I guess there's some different models for sure. Keep it single entity as another sort of angle, as obviously the XFL and the old AAF attempted to do. To your point, it's hard not to be cynical, and I think especially coming from a Birmingham, and given its many times over disappointments over time with pro football, it's hard even to even be more cynical, I guess, than the average fan. But there's always that sort of a glimmer of intrigue and possibilities. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's got a whole lot of there just yet. And look, if we're going to be launching in April, we're having this conversation. What, about 6 months maybe before it actually starts? Here's the question I've got embedded in there: where do you think these players are going to come from? And more importantly, or interestingly, where does the NFL fit in all this? I mean, Fox is a major broadcaster of the NFL. You can't imagine Eric Shanks and company wanting to upset the NFL with this.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and that's what makes me, I don't know. I mean, if for some reason they could hitch their wagon and, the NFL could go in on it and say, okay, this is a feeder system for us. We're going to pump in X amount of dollars and have an official relationship with them. That'd be terrific. Of course, they did that with the World League and NFL Europe, and again, it lost enough money where they just decided it just wasn't worth it. But yeah, that's my thing. I want to know, what kind of players are they going to get? I mean, are they going to get the kind of players that the last XFL got, which, they were very good players. They were just, they were last cuts in training camp kind of guys. And I think a lot of them have proven that, when given their chance in the NFL. But like you mentioned, if they're just looking for cheap programming, if they're looking to make money, one way to make money is not to pay players a lot of money, so that's what kind of concerns me, because I think ultimately if you want to be successful with any kind of league, you're going to need to put decent athletes on the field. I think at some point people are going to realize if you don't do that, they're going to stop watching.
Well, I will say I think there is one thing that could be lurking behind the scenes in all of this, and it does require some forethought. But even in the last couple of years, things have dramatically changed in terms of where the pipeline of talent for the almighty NFL comes from. And one has to look no further than places like the NBA and a whole raft of other sports. But the NBA is a pretty interesting example. There have been, over the last literally couple of years, at least 2 or 3 major alternatives that have been launched to that of college basketball, the ultimate and historic feeder system to the NBA, as different paths, right? Whether it's and you throw in a little NIL, name, image, and likeness components to it. There are some newer ways to gain attention and get into the pro funnel, shall we say, at least in the NBA. Maybe this is, and people have talked about this for years, right? Where is the alternate path aside from college football to the NFL? Similarly, and maybe this is a longer term vision, assuming there is one.
Yeah, going back to, I think it was the Pac Pro Football League that was proposed for a few years, where you just get the guys out of high school, $50,000 a year, whatever is their salary, and you pay for their schooling. Yeah, if all of a sudden the USFL said, okay, we're for kids, we're going to be open for kids who don't want to go to college. yeah, that would be a very interesting dynamic. But yeah, I don't know if we're at that point yet. I mean, that you're exactly right when it comes to basketball. I mean, that's changed the game completely, in terms of how, talent, makes their way from high school to the pros. And, you got to figure football's going that route at some point, but also you look at like what's happening with the SEC, expanding to, God, they'll have 24 teams before it's over. And really to a large degree, college football is a pretty darn good AAA professional league anyway, especially when you get to to some of these elite teams. So I don't know. I mean, it's a weird landscape right now. And that's why it's so bizarre for me that and it's not just, I mean, the XFL and the USFL are the two main spring leagues, but I think there are two different versions of Major League Football that say they're going to start. And remember Ricky Williams' Freedom Football League, which has been sitting dormant now for, it seems like 5 years. There's a whole crap load of leagues out there. But
what about the fan-controlled football league, adding a new franchise this year?
Now, is that, I have not watched, is that an indoor league? I mean, I hate to sound ignorant, but I am completely ignorant when it comes to fan controlled league.
It ran last spring or so. I think they had, it was like a 6-game season, and most of the games were streamed live on Twitch, and there's a bunch of interactive components to it. You even had Johnny Manziel play a couple of games. Yes, it was sort of a modified indoor version of such, but it's probably more of a harbinger of things to come, right? This blending of ultimately betting, but interactivity, fan engagement with the actual play itself. There's probably some there as to what the future looks like, where you're blending, the best of the real world with the best of the gaming component of football play.
Well, and two, with indoor football, I realize, leagues come and go, but there is always some sort of indoor football league around, and I always thought that would be, and of course it looked like the Arena Football League for years had finally found its niche. And I thought, well, this is going to be the spring football that everyone needs because it's going to last forever. But then when they went under and now it's fragmented, but yeah, spring seems like a really good time. And I'm just speaking from the standpoint of being an old guy fan. Spring's just a good time for indoor football, that kind of thing. I mean, what you mentioned with this fan control thing and indoor football league and other things like that. I mean, it just, I don't know, just the feng shui of sports seems to fit better if indoor football kind of occupies the spring.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not unlike indoor soccer relative to the outdoor game, right? There's no, you don't have to force yourself to try to separate the two because they're not completely similar. They're just different, and that going in. So there is no comparison. There is no degradation of the challenger versus the real thing, so to speak. I tend to agree with you on that, but spring football, though, we've talked about this for ages, right? And I think most people still, despite all the fits and starts and stumbles that besides the stories around them all, there still feels to a lot of people like there is a marketable gap in that sort of dead zone between the Super Bowl and whenever the NFL starts up again. And you see it a little bit with spring football in the college game, right? These spring games now being televised. That wasn't a thing 10 years ago, right? Where there's an itch, for something competitive. I don't know. I just think as long as there are men and football and money, people are going to continue to sort of ride up that hill and try to plant some flags to do so.
Oh, yeah. And just, speaking for me, if Birmingham has a team, I'm going to watch Birmingham's team play, whether it's USFL, XFL, or whatever FL comes along. I mean, I'm going to watch it. And to your point about, football in the spring, I mean, baseball, and again, I'm just speaking personally here, I really love minor league baseball, but I've reached the point now where Major League Baseball, it's almost lost on me. So it's not like spring football would be interfering with the national pastime, that doesn't bother me. I mean, for me, spring football interferes with Major League Rugby, and I realize I'm in the vast minority there. But just as far as my as my viewing habits, I mean, there are certainly enough athletes to make a league like this go. But I think with me, it always comes down to, you almost wish you had a Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk just buy a league, where it can run for perpetuity. You don't have to worry about anything. As long as they're there, the league's going to last forever, and just let it grow and not worry about, having to turn a profit after 3 years or whatever. Because, given time, I think something like that could work. But I guess, I'm not sure I got the point across earlier, what I was trying to say. It's just, I just don't think the people who run these things are willing to continue to put money behind it. I mean, I think they want a certain profit by a certain time, and I just don't know if that's realistic. I'd love to think they would ride it out for years and give something a chance to grow, but, I mean, even these very, very rich people want to get richer, and if they see that they're losing money or they're not making the kind of profit they thought, they're going to pull the plug and go into some new toy.
Yeah, I also wonder too if this is also a relatively inexpensive investment for Fox Sports, just generally, right? For the NFL and its future, and with them, as well as perhaps other sports, as technology and streaming and interactivity and betting, right? Remember, Fox, of all the major U.S. programmers out there, is the only one that has purchased and owns its own betting platform. Others are just licensing their names to betting.
Yeah,
so
it feels good.
Yeah, so you wonder too that it as I sort of hinted at earlier, it may not matter. It may not matter if they go to the actual individual cities, how many people show up at the games and stuff. Maybe it's just an ancillarily, if I can make an adverb out of it, additional stream of revenue or two. But maybe this is a bigger picture thing here, that this is more just one gigantic experiment with the added benefit of helping players play some more games and fans watch some more games on TV to kind of learn how interactivity and betting and all those other sort of newfangled stuff can help them maybe compete against Amazon to broadcast games in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely love to be proved wrong. I mean, I would love to know that this or that, well, I mean, I don't think you can have the USFL and the XFL both exist. I think if they're both moderately successful, you'd probably see some sort of merger in the future. But, it would be fantastic if someone could finally, again, be that 16 seed where you beat the one. If you could finally figure it out, I mean, they would. I would consider that one of the great feats in sports business history, because I would love to see it. But again, I'm speaking to it from the standpoint of someone who has lived through 7 leagues and 7 teams in Birmingham. None of those leagues and none of those teams still exist. So, it's just really hard to think, okay, this is going to be the one. Finally, this is going to be the one that lasts. You hope it is, but it's just, you just don't want to go on that date because you kind of know how it's going to end.
All righty, the stage is set and the anticipation just grows. It's with electricity in the air, the coming weeks and months. Let's see what transpires in this new USFL. Let's see. You can prepare yourselves by going back in time, not only to the some of the history of the USFL, but also all the teams that have come and gone in Birmingham football. 2 ways, frankly. One is the book. We talked about it for the first time on our episode number 184, which you can find, by the way, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up that episode 184 or this one, 240, and you will find a convenient link to Scott Adamson's wonderful book. It's a treat and a romp through Birmingham's professional football experiences. It's called The Home Team, My Bromance with Off-Brand Football. You will enjoy it. It's published by Burnaby Books. And like I said, you can find a convenient link to it at goodseatsstillavailable.com. It'll be whisked away to Amazon. You can get it in all kinds of different forms and speeds delivered to your home. Of course, if you want to buy it at your independent bookseller or wherever else you find books, go for it, but just get it, for God's sake, so you're going to enjoy it. And in addition to that, I highly recommend a bookmark to you at adamsonmedia.com. That's his website, Scott's website. That is Adamson, ADAMSON media, adamsonmedia.com. And just great blog posts, not only of the old USFL, but all kinds of pro football leagues, and frankly, other forgotten leagues generally too. And there's not a week or a month that goes by that Scott doesn't find a league that I never heard of before, or even a proposed league that was looking like it was going to be real, but never really showed up in reality. But Scott has somehow unearthed the details and the stories behind them. You will enjoy following him there for sure. You can also follow him on social media on Twitter. You follow him at Adamson SL, as in Sam, as in L, Adamson SL on Twitter. So by all means, follow, buy the book, whatever, and get yourself ready for, we think, hopefully, the USFL 2.0 coming up in April of next year. What else? Our social media feeds. You can find us on Twitter at Good Seats Still. You can find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You can find us on Facebook at Good Seats Still Available. And you can find our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can send us email at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can get our email newsletter each and every week. Just go to the website, give us your name and email address, and we'll get you on the list to give you a little tip off. So what we're going to be talking about next week. And of course, our great pal, Jerry Payne. Jerry Payne, Audio Excellence. Thank you, sir, for all your kind and good editing skills this week. We appreciate it. And we're going to leave you now with a little, I will say the USFL had some great theme songs, especially from their broadcasters. You heard at the top of the show the great theme music for ABC's broadcasts of the USFL. And we're going to leave you with those Monday night and midweek game themes from ESPN back in the 80s. And this is what you heard when you were getting ready to watch those games on cable. Yes, the fledgling thing known as cable back in 1983. So enjoy this little piece of USFL history, the original that is, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.